Well, it's 10 o'clock, which means it's time to start another ViniMark webinar. Now, at the beginning of the year, during ViniMark's January webinar, we had VinPro CEO Rico Basson talking about a new communications body that was being developed, the South African Wine NPC. And it was being formed to help the wine industry improve efficiency of communication, to deliver accountability, and to strengthen negotiations with the South African government. So now, 9 months later, we have Rico Basson with us again, only this time not as the VinPro CEO, but as the CEO of the still quite fresh South African Wine NPC. Now, as is always the case with ViniMark webinars, the purpose of this session is really to provide practical tips to help producers get the most out of this new body. We want to help producers understand how the body works, but also to hear what this body actually aims to achieve. So we're going to spend some time outlining the relationships between this new body and existing bodies like SARVIS or WOZA or VinPro or the Drinks Federation. But then we're also going to tease out the practical implications for producers who are seeking to communicate with these bodies. Then I think it'll be very useful. We've got a lovely visual where we outline the new structure, which will again provide clear action points to help people and producers access the right members of the right teams for certain tasks. And this, of course, will minimize frustrations that so often come with a change in structure. And finally, what we're going to do is give Rico a chance to share what is exciting him about the future of the institution. But we'll also be firing some questions at Rico on how he sees things improving as a result of these new structures. So joining us on the panel with Rico, we have a number of voices who will each bring their own insights and questions on how to get the most out of the South African Wine NPC. So speaking from an international perspective, we have journalist, master of wine, and seemingly ubiquitous South African proponent, Tim Atkin. And then from closer to home, we have the ViniMark Brand Portfolio Director, Helen Koch. Now, part of Helen's job is to ensure that wine brands have positioned themselves strongly to maximize their impact in the market. Also from the producer's corner, we have Karina Goos, Kleine Zelz's General Manager. And finally, we have Rico's successor, the CEO of VinPro, Konrad Skutte. So to kick off the conversation, I wanted to take a step back into some South African wine history and ask Rico the question, Rico, what were the major headaches that triggered such a high-level strategic change in structure? What were we failing to achieve as an industry that set this all in motion?
Donna, good morning, and yeah, thanks for the invitation. I'm not going to go too far back in history, because if we talk structures, then in the mid-2000s, there was a structure called the SA Wine and Brandy Council, and it lasted until 2008, and then unbundled. So we started with the notion of at least a consensus strategy in 2016, because what I found is that we have got different bodies, and what is missing is the alignment or the coordination in this matrix system. So COVID as an event really, in my view, opened up some of the fault lines, and perhaps that's the way to refer to this, where we struggled to get consensus. We as VinPro went to court, wholesalers decided we're not going to go to court. We didn't have the agility. So I think we were pretty much in the midst of COVID when we went back to the drawing board. And if I say we, then I mean producers, wineries, marketers, wholesalers, and say it's a new world, it's challenging, let's go back to strat, let's decide what we can and can't do on the back of a declining production cycle for this industry, but also let's take cognizance of what's happening in the world. And so, Jonah, perhaps if you were to ask me what are the three big trends that I would pick going forward, I think the one fact is that everybody's looking for growth out there, and we see the consumption declining. But secondly, from a World Health Organization, I do think, unfortunately, that the anti-alcohol lobby is gaining some ground, and therefore wine do find ourselves in a bit of a predicament with high alcohol, and that in itself is a trend, lower alcohol taxation going forward. And then thirdly, and leading into the structure, is integration, integration, integration. I think every single company is busy, be it Kleine Salz or anybody else. And that's exactly how we got to the structure, because we've got excellence in different companies, be that Woza or Sorbus or Vinpro, but it's not integrated. And therefore, one needs to look at this from a producer perspective. We know that 80% of our wineries are small. So looking at solutions and looking at the role of a industry body, our job is to integrate and provide them with either the advocacy that they can't do on their own, be that taxation or illicit trade or market access, but also provide them with solutions such as tourism and even the viticulture that Conrad does and others. So there's a clear role differentiation, Jonah, between what we do as a body, where we operate collectively on certain strategies and measurable outcomes, and how the industry then acts and plays. And this new structure then came together as, I think, probably overdue, if you ask me. But what we have now is an inclusive board. The new South African Wine Board is inclusive of Black-owned companies, as well as wholesalers, as well as producers. We still work, and I'll show on the structure just now, very closely with Vinpro, who we use as our producer liaison body. And we've got a similar group for the wholesale. And then if we go down, we now have a case where Woza, Sorbus, and the Brandy Foundation are working joint by the hip, as I could call it. So perhaps I'll pause there and ask Anouret to just put up a slide or two, but I don't know if you've got a follow-up question.
Well, no, perhaps, Anouret, while you are putting up that slide, you mentioned advocacy for smaller producers being one of the things that has been achieved. Was no one performing that role? I mean, as you say, 80% of our producers are small. Surely there was some sort of advocacy before that, or am I wrong about that?
No, you're absolutely right, and it's not fair to give criticism. I think when we went into the structure, we said it's not going to be a cost-cutting exercise, meaning that we're going to go in here and have a relook at headcount. It is unlocking efficiency. So the problem before, and Anouret, perhaps you can go on one slide, is that you had this myriad of different structures. So before, Vinpro, and where Conrad now is, represents 2,600 grape growers and wineries. And the South Africa Liquor Brand Association to the right would represent the wholesalers. So when we advocate, we would consult Vinpro Salva and then hopefully go with a joint position to government, or if not joint, which happens from time to time, we would have a producer positioning, which is not ideal. What we've now done is we're on our way to merge 2,600 producers into SA Wine. This will be consulted with the producers, and obviously they need to know what are the service offering. What we do guarantee is that it will not cost more money. So one of our commitments is we will work with the budget that we have. Salva, the one on the right, has since also transitioned, and they are now the Spirits Representative Association. So they do not have wine members anymore. So all those wholesale members like Heineken, like Minimark is there, KWV and DGB, becomes part of SA Wine, which means we now represent from, I would want to say, nursery level all the way through to the trade, which is fantastic. And the board representation is then similar. Down below is the different organizations. And I know, Johnny, you've got a question or two as to why do we still see a Sorbus or a Woza seemingly freestanding. But what the structure does is the structure is funded via statutory levies. Every grape tonnage or ton, every litre produced, in the case of brandy spirits, in the case of exports, packaged and bulk wine, pays either a couple of cents or a couple of rand. And that comes to about 125 million rand, 125, which is far less than our Australian and other counterparts get. What we've done now is we've changed the flow of the funds. So from the 1st of July, the quantum doesn't change, but all the funds are collected at SA Wine or South African Wine. And it is then disbursed with a formal contract to the likes of Woza, Salvis, and Brandy. And there's a firm set of key performance measures within that, which means that you fixed one thing, John, that was broken, and that is the accountability. So the buck need to stop somewhere. That buck now stops at South African Wine. And I suppose firsthand, we are accountable to all the levy payers, which really would be everybody that produce, make wine or sell. But there are also other forums and broader networks like media and others. But I think for starters, our accountability to big and small is to have a clear strategy, to have clear measurements, to be transparent in what we do, and take it from there. So still a little bit of, I think, a picture with a lot of names on it, but from a practical working relationship, somebody like Siobhan Thompson would work very closely with me now in my team here. The same with Yvette at Salvis and Christelle. And I think it's great that we've brought in Brandy as well, Jono. Brandy was almost here on the side. They do brilliant work in the domestic market on premiumization of products. And when we now look at even our events, we may see more Brandy on exhibition next to wine, which I think is a fantastic opportunity.
Fantastic. Yeah. So I mean, I think you're right. There's a lot going on in that diagram. So let's maybe drill down a little bit, just to touch on one of the things you commented about funding that comes in through statutory levies. Obviously, there was an existing kind of fixed cost, operational cost of the previous structures as they all existed. Has there been a vast reduction in those fixed costs?
There has been. Look, as I said, we've kept the head count. The savings is twofold. I mean, we've obviously closed down every single website that is not relevant anymore, and with that goes media and agencies. What I can see is that efficiency is kicking in. I mean, the way of work, the agility of decision making, for example, because we don't have a cumbersome committee and a board structure anymore. Having said that, we still comply, but the speed of decision making is one of the vast differences, Jonah, that I see. And with that, fixing the accountability, and as a structure, we most certainly will set ourselves a target to go and raise additional funds. I mean, it's a crying shame that the industry spends 125 million, and we at the moment only get about 11 million from outside parties, excluding Vinpro. So I think it's up to us to go and find a rand for rand match, for example, on the 20% we spend on transformation. I mean, that 25 million rand should be matched via various agency agreements with new parties. And we should also, when we look at things like the corporate social spend of our companies, I mean, I think that should be collated and go into 2 or 3 main projects by way of example. So I think we can do much better, Jonah, by alignment. And I think the efficiency means that we don't run up costs or excessive overheads on the structure. In actual fact, we are narrowing down on a lot of the things.
So if I've understood you correctly, what you're saying is the cost to the producers remains the same. Some of your operations have been slimmed down, but you've still managed to keep the teams intact. And there's an increased focus on finding new sources of funding. Is that fair? Have I summed it up correctly?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Jonah. I think we're not going to make... Sorry?
No, carry on.
No, so, I mean, the question is also, well, where is that sources, eh? Because we've got a fiscus that's under pressure. But the likes of Westgrow has been great partners for us. The likes of the Western Cape Department of Agriculture, National, DTIC. So I don't think somebody one single party will come up with another 100 million, but project to project. And I can perhaps later, when I have time, talk to you a little bit about the exciting stuff, the climate change projects, the carbon projects. Those things, I think, are not only fundable, but also a way to get more partners on board and get us over the line. I think what is very important, Jono, and I think the biggest challenge for us is to get the industry to fully buy in to the strategy. I mean, the structure is merely there as a support. My take, and perhaps Corina and others can come in, unless we view this next 5 to 10 years as a growth opportunity, and for us it will mean value growth, we will keep on disappointing ourselves. And this is a difficult one for South Africa. We will lose probably another 60 million liters due to the hectares that decline. It does mean a lot of merger consolidation. But if you ask me, are we at a good junction? Are we at a place where, unlike competitors, we don't have to uproot 30,000 hectares overnight? I would say absolutely. Do we believe that? Well, that's another webinar to talk it through. But I think I would argue we've got the fundamentals. It's now to kick into growth and offer those solutions, and then make sure that whatever we do in market really goes through to the planting and the cultivar decision, and that's where Conrad and his team come in. So Anurag, perhaps I could just one slide on. So Jono, perhaps a lot of the questions I get is, but this is confusing because at Vinpro, you guys dealt with a lot of these things, and what are you doing now? So what we've done to clean up the advocacy part and the services part is Vinpro, and Conrad, you can talk to that. Vinpro, in my view, has really gone back to their strengths from the 1st of July, and that is they are the experts on technical services, agronomy. They have got more than 50 sites where they do experimental plantings, Gen Z. They've got economists. They've got a software company that the wineries use. WineMS owned a nursery which has got 90% of the library of plant material for the sector. And then obviously stakeholder engagement really is back to the producers. And then all the rest of the stuff is down SA Wine, which seems like an extensive list, but this is what you need when you talk advocacy and solutions. The harbor is an issue, so let's devise a plan. Let's talk to that. The electricity is a challenging one, but we see how companies are going off grid, and let's offer them with even carbon solutions on some of those things. And then to the right, very similar to SA Wine, which is now the single voice for the industry, we've established the Drinks Federation, which is the single voice for the South African alcohol industry. So you'll hear the wording single voice coming through quite a bit. And I think it's important that we organize ourselves before government come and organize us. Hey, it's almost like, let's get our house in order and let's get our priorities in order. We love to make noise. My challenge is always, do we know what we ask? And do we know what we can give? Right? Otherwise, we're just shouting. And I think this is having a clear agenda on what we need and how we balance that. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm not sure if Conrad want to come in, Jono, but
no, absolutely. So I know you've touched on some of the things, but it would be nice, Conrad, for you to talk a little bit about how your role is going to have changed. And I know Rico's mentioned some of it, but given that you are literally sitting in Rico's chair, I guess the challenge must be to carve a new path for Vinpro in the sense that its portfolio has shifted a little bit. Now, when I visited your website, it seemed to be very similar to what it was before the SA Wine NPC, South African Wine NPC. But maybe you can talk a little bit about how things have changed and where your focus is as Vinpro.
Yes, thank you, Jono. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this webinar. So I think with that slide up on the screen, that gives me, if we can maybe go, yeah, that one, thank you. So that gives me a good discussion point on the different role clarification. So I will highlight a couple of things that I believe that changed in the past couple of months. But before we go to the slide, I think the one important thing for me sitting in Rico's chair is that the Vinpro board remained exactly the same in the past 3 or 4 months. So they bought into this whole process strategically, and obviously they've been a pillar in this whole process, helping and guiding me as well. And then specifically our chairperson remained the same as well, Anton Smuts, and he's also online. So for all the Vinpro board of directors, thank you for joining us, and then also giving your inputs. So I think if we go to that yellow box on the left-hand side, so back the slide, thank you very much. I definitely see that there's more focus in the Vinpro environment, and we are definitely driving more efficiencies. So Rico quickly mentioned those 6 focus areas. I can maybe elaborate a little bit on them. So firstly, in the technical consultation services department, that's the core of our business that started about more than 40 years ago. And if we look what we're doing in that arena, we do have a team of agriculturists that has a footprint within all the South African wine growing regions. So over there, we do perform face-to-face consultation. We do about 2,500 farm visits per annum. And I think it's important for the producers and the listeners to actually know where they can get what from Vinpro. So I think the face-to-face consultation is really important, as well as our soil scientists in this technical consultation team. So those guys get into about 4,600 profile pits per annum. And they also have capabilities of putting up terrain analysis and all sorts of interesting maps, which definitely gives the producer the ability to be more adaptable in a fast-paced environment. So as part of the technical consultation department, we also do knowledge transfer. That is in collaboration with SA Wine or South African Wine NPC. So we do maintain industry structures, and the idea is that we have the ability and the knowledge to leverage those structure to transfer knowledge towards the right target audience within that environment. So over there, we maintain structures like a viticulture forum, regional information days, as well as study groups within the various regions. We also perform industry services. So one of 2 of the examples that we do is indeed that we compile a South African wine grape harvest report. We also do some crop estimations, and on that we collaborate with Savas, or that's also part of South African Wine at this stage. We do provide training towards farm workers. So within the past 8 years, we trained more than 5,500 farm workers. Then our producers also tell us they do not always have enough time to travel and gather information overseas and also locally at scientific symposiums or conferences. So that's a big part of gathering some of the information that we do. We package that and give it back to producers in a format that they are comfortable with. And then Rico quickly touched on Gen Z, which is our Vineyards of the Future project. So over there, we planted more than 50 different demonstration plots across the different wine growing regions that demonstrates different clones, cultivar training systems. And over there, the producers can go and have a look. How would those different clones or cultivars react towards the diverse climate conditions that we do experience in South Africa? We are also in collaboration with Stellenbosch University, where we are putting up a training vineyard, and also at school level with Willan College, because we do believe that we need to get that knowledge towards the young people in the country as well. They are going to be the next leaders in the country and have a firm understanding of what's happening in the wine and viticulture environment. So the second point up on the board, and I'm going to go quickly through them, is our production plan. So that provides feedback on the production structure and also the profitability per enterprise that partake in this important project. So we have about 282 production units that participate in this project. And that means that we capture up to about 29% of the total hectares planted in the country. So very important for us. Then our affiliate WineMS, it is an affiliate that offers leading specialized winery management software solution towards the industry. We have more than 100 wineries that sign up to that service, and we cover about 73% of the total tons harvested within the industry. The fourth point is then Vititec plant improvement. So Vititec has a really important function on plant improvement within the country. So they have an important source of cultivars and clones for the producers. And in order to maintain that source, they perform more than 40,000 ELISA tests to make sure that this material is clean from leaf row virus and all other kinds of viruses. And then we have 622 different cultivar rootstocks and clones available that producers can buy, and we also sell them to other nurseries within the industry environment. Within our investment portfolio, I think it's important to realize that most of our income is derived from services that we sell towards producers. We are also fortunate to have a strong investment portfolio at this stage. And when our board of directors and more than 2,500 wine grape producers decide there's some important strategic actions that need to be taken within the industry, we can allocate funding towards that. I think South African wine could be a good example of a strategic initiative. And there's also some funding that will flow to that initiative within the next 3 years, which is obviously in the interest of the South African wine grape producer. And then to end off with on the stakeholder engagement, all of those actions in the middle that Rico talked about, example of water and electricity, I think it's really important that Vinpro is also up to date what's happening in the middle, so that we can join in on the conversation and contribute where necessary. So yeah, I think that's shortly from my side. Within the next 12 months, we are going through a strategic review process that we call Prune to Perfection. And after this process, we will revisit our focus areas, but I do believe that the main focus areas would probably remain the same, and we would look into doing it more efficiently and more focused within the different environments.
Fantastic, Conor. Thanks so much for outlining that all. There's maybe one or two questions that we can come out of it. I know you said a lot of your income comes from services that you sell to producers, but you obviously also provide a lot of free services. I assume a lot of the training that gets provided is at least partially funded. Am I right about that? Or is it all paid for?
So part of what we do is definitely industry services. So in our industry services, we like to collaborate with other entities or stakeholders. But for instance, if there's a balance that we need to make up, we can go to our investments and do that. One example that I can give at this stage, up in the Olifant River, there was a big fruit fly project, and we made our services from our Olifants consultant available to coordinate that project and make sure that all the producers get buy-in to actually get that services from fruit fly project to be more sustainable and not have a lot of issues with fruit flies up in the Olifant River.
No. So perhaps one more question is, outside of your website, where do producers learn about everything that you, because you've outlined a lot of incredible tasks and functions there, and I feel that, do you feel like the communication is sufficient? Do you feel like those services are all at capacity because everyone knows exactly where to find it? Or do you feel like then there could be an improvement in the way these offerings are outlined and made prominent?
Yeah, Jonah, I think that's a good question. And I think that's a question that will be answered within the next 12 months within our strategic process. So that theme, Prune to Perfection, I do believe that there's a need from producers to see how we can excel in the services that we do provide via integration or focusing more on certain efficiencies. But yeah, definitely we will look into that within the next 12 months, and hopefully that will provide more clarity. If there are certain gaps that we need to fill, we will have a look to fill those gaps.
And do you have presence on social media where producers can follow, find out about conferences or new services or information that you've put out? What is the easiest way for producers to stay or to keep your services front of mind? Because we all know how busy everyone gets, and it's quite a tricky thing to have to pop back to a website once a week to see what's changed. So how are your functions communicated?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, within our knowledge transfer process, we do have different platforms, from information days, regional information days, and study groups. But to answer your question, on the social media platforms, Vinpro does have a Facebook page, Instagram page, and also LinkedIn. So we do post specific information up there. But I think this is also important to remember. We do liaise with SA Wine on that one voice for the industry function that they do. So we are fully aligned with them, and I think that's a really critical role that we play over there as well. Yeah, not to confuse producers, but we do have a very good social media online platform that we use as well.
No, absolutely. I think the thinking behind my question is that we often perceive the industry as a group of professionals who understand what's required and what they need to find out and where to find it. But as we know, winemaking in particular is often a passion that might grip someone, you know, halfway through their life. They almost enter it by accident. And part of the problem with that is that when you go into something driven by passion, or as I said, 80% of our wineries are really small, you often don't know what you don't know. So the idea of having very prominent touch points where producers can find and learn more about the amazing work you're doing is I think, important. Now, Rico, and to come back to you, we were talking about you guys, Vinpro, being aligned with South African Wine NPC, and earlier you mentioned that ultimately South African Wine NPC is accountable to the producers. But I wondered if you can talk to how that practically plays out. How are producers able to hold the South African Wine NPC accountable? Because I'm struggling to see what form that would take.
Look, I think, John, firstly, South African Wine is a membership in its final format, a membership model. Hey, so what you'll have is, it's not only the levies that come in. There's also at the moment different classes of membership fees. So I think firstly, being open and transparent on communication is part of that, but also to consult. I think it'll be an absolute crisis if we as an industry body think out a strat and go our own way and nobody comes along. I mean, so I think this is very, very clear. And to give you an idea, I mean, one of the things that we are doing, and Karina can perhaps come in from a Wines of South Africa perspective, we're doing a end-to-end global market access review at the moment, which is not only about the role that WOSA plays, which is really the promotion part, but it's also to answer the question on where does the growth sit? Where is potential premiumization markets? And then back to things like the tariff, non-tariff part, the harbor, the messaging, and the funding. So I know that Wines of South Africa often gets a lot of criticism for exports, which I think is unfounded. So what you'll hear from me is that we're going to consult this. This is the opportunity for exporters. There are 600 of them to obviously combine forces. We get consensus on where we go, what we do, and it's a collective effort, Jonah. So to me, it's not only about putting up a scorecard on the 1st of January to say the industry is making progress or not. But having said that, Jonah, there's I keep on saying, unless we get the industry to go into a replanting cycle, we can come up with a number of key performance measures, but unless we can get the profitability up with growth, we will probably, as I say, not succeed. And that there is no such thing as a silver bullet. Having said that, I think we can join forces and make that happen. So it's a combination of being consultative, getting membership feedback, making sure that we listen, making sure that we give traction on, so where are we with the port? Where are we with the Japan tariff? And where are we with regenerative wines and all these things? And so what this becomes, to your point, is a menu. There's a menu of solutions for a winery, and I would urge wineries that we don't only have the push communication, which we do, but they come to us, or that they come and sit with Conrad and they work through that menu, because there's a lot of things which they may not know, and we may not know that that's a need. So John, perhaps, yeah, what we do know is that only 30% of members read. So 70% don't read. Anyway,
Yes.
that's just my little snippet on that.
No, well, absolutely. And I think that's hugely important to spend some time on. And I think I've even been guilty of this in some senses, that often we want to blame the institution when goals aren't achieved. And I think what I'm hearing you say is that the more meaningfully producers engage with you, the better you are able to do your job. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
So my only question follow-up would be is, how friction-free is the process of getting hold of the right people, finding time, sitting down? Because face-to-face meetings, I mean, as you say, we've got thousands of producers, or hundreds of producers at least. What does that look like practically? If a small producer coming into the market wants to look at your menu, so to speak, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, the best way would be to go to either the website or where possible, have a quick 20-minute virtual. And I don't think we're going to look for 20 things. We're going to look for 3 things or 4 things that we can do better. And that, John, it may be a non-tariff matter in Nigeria, or it may be a lighter glass packaging solution, or it may be where do I go site specific with Chardonnay? Where should I plant? So I think with the partnership with Vinpro, becomes the conduit to, at least with, I suppose, one touch, put you in place with somebody that can give a solution. And that's where our agility to provide this. We can't be all things for all people as well, Jonah. I mean, we export to 130 markets. We will have to bank where is the top 5. But at least we know what we do, and we can, within that, use the strength of messaging, innovation, growth to get us there.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rico. So I want to change the angle a little bit, and it may seem to talk about journalism, and it may seem a little obtuse, but core to everything that you guys have spoken about so far really is the ease of communication, and also the accountability that comes from communication. So we can hold those two in tension. One of the things that concern me in the organogram is that journalism and advertising fall under the exact same silo in the business structure. And obviously this can cause all sorts of problems when it comes to preserving integrity, but also of South African journalism, but also in delivering accountability. If the journalism function is funded or allowed to exist by the same body that is paid to make South African wine look good. Now, I'm not talking about needless criticism, but as we know, we need the concept of a loyal opposition. And it concerns me that that might not be able to happen if journalism is lumped in with PR or with advertising. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you see South African wine journalism operating within the structure, and how would it be different to a public relations employee?
So John, I'll try and keep it simple, because I'm glad Tim is here, who's an expert journalist out there. So what we've brought into the structure is a magazine called the Wineland magazine. The magazine is 92 years old. It was the old Wynboer years ago. And that publication goes out fully subsidized to, I think, more than 4,500 individuals. So we actually, via an advertisement model, subsidize that magazine to go to every single winemaker, farmer, etc. So to do that, we use a combination of 2 in-house journalist. The magazine follow a certain theme per month, and they would probably, with the editor, generate about 60% of the content on thought leadership. Where it is a promotional article, I think your point on advertisement is we will indicate that this is a Kleine Zaltse promotional article. One could argue quite a bit, Jonas, should that magazine become a levy-funded magazine? At the moment, that's not on the cards. It needs to look after itself. So I would argue the magazine speaks directly to the broader industry. It's got some independence. What we also do with that team is to assist us with media, press releases, communication, and the PR that you speak up. So the manager, Wanda Augustine, doubles up as the editor of a magazine and also the gatekeeper for broader communication, and she will work closely on narrative-specific aspects. So we've done a lot of work on communication to make sure we land the right narrative for wine. I think we should admit that we haven't done a great job, but also make sure, who are we talking to? Are we talking to government now, or are we talking to an importer in New York? And then for the rest, I think there's freedom for journalism. Hey, and I think we should also talk about where do we go with wine journalism. But I think the independence of journalism is something that I subscribe to, and therefore, while it is a fine balance, I would argue that we're not overstepping at the moment. But that's my view on the model and how it works.
So I think some of my questions, and I'm going to get Tim to talk more to this, is that historically, you know, not every couple of years, but there have been a number of articles over the last 2 decades, always from international journalists visiting our shores, revealing some heinous scandals or issues that really should have been snubbed out earlier, which seemingly no one locally had ever reported on for whatever reason. And that always concerned me. Why is it that no one was reporting on this locally? Why did it take an international person to come in and expose, say, labor conditions, for example? And I would love to see South African wine journalism being the body that actually tackles those rather than having someone from another country. So that's kind of where my questions are coming from. And I would think the South African Wine NPC needs to be prioritizing that role as well, almost having its own watchdog function under journalism. And I'm just not sure that can happen with the current structure. So Tim, am I totally off? Am I going crazy? Am I becoming a tin hat conspiracy member, or are there some concerns here? Can you talk to it as a journalist?
Absolutely, and thank you for having me on the panel, everybody, and nice to see you. Delighted nobody's mentioned the rugby. I've been on for 40 minutes. It's very kind of you. We're still suffering, so thank you very much. I did this whole thing about independence within a market. I think it's much harder if you're a journalist working within a given market, because you're only really writing about that market. And remember that the producers can always deny you access to their wines and deny you access to their tastings. It's easier, if you like, to see it from outside, because then you don't depend solely on that industry for or a large part of your income. So it's slightly easier, if you like, to throw stones from outside and come in. Having said that, I've never been put under any pressure whatsoever in South Africa to say nice things about anybody or about the industry. And I think that that's one of the strengths of the industry, that it does take criticism, and it's happy for journalists to be independent. There are some people who don't like what I write and other people write. I won't disagree with that, and that's fair enough. But I think that South Africa is a lot better than a lot of countries. I mean, you wouldn't believe some of the places I go where I get accused of being an enemy of the region for just saying things that are pretty apparent to anybody from outside coming in and looking at it. And I think that I like to think of myself as a sort of critical friend of South Africa, you know, that I feel positively about South African wine, although I have been critical of it in the past and I continue to be so. But I think that you know, I come from a position of wanting to help, in a sense. I'm not saying that's necessarily journalistic, and some people would argue you shouldn't even talk to producers when you're tasting their wines or go and visit them, that you should just taste every single wine blind in a hotel room. And I suppose that's the kind of absolutist position on wine journalism. My position is I like to engage with people. I like to know what's going on the ground. And I think the way to do that is to talk to people and try to understand their problems. And in a sense, support them by writing about the very best. I mean, I think the transformation thing is another important thing that Rico touched on. And I think I see part of my role as being, trying to understand what's going on and maybe just push people a little bit more in that direction to say, hey, could we move a bit faster? Could we just bring through some of these people? Could we educate people more? And I suppose that's partly my role as a journalist. I mean, it's interesting that you're saying, what is a journalist? And I think these days it's actually quite hard to say, because there is this, as you said, this dovetailing, this overlap, if you like, between journalism and advertising, in a sense. And journalism is maybe not quite as pure and as absolute as it once was. There's a very famous poem. It's a bit of doggerel, really. I don't know if you know this. I don't know when it was written. I think it was probably it's old. He was writing about politics, political journalism. It's by a chap called Humbert Wolf, and the poem is as follows. He says, "You cannot hope to bribe or twist, thank God, the British journalist, but seeing what the man will do unbribed, there's no occasion to." And that sometimes reminds me of what's going on a little bit with communication these days. And I'm actually quite supportive of people who are influencers. I think that we need them in a sense. But I think when the influencer just becomes too close to the product and is sponsored by the product, then it's an overlap that slightly concerns me. Sorry for the long response.
No, I absolutely appreciate it. I think we're talking specifically about how we talk about wine, the product.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering about journalism that addresses wine, the ecosystem, or wine, the socioeconomic phenomenon. And I'm more concerned about how that sort of communication will be done. But I don't want to get bogged down in the weeds about it.
Well, the only thing I would say is you can almost divide wine journalism into two schools. One is wine criticism, where people are best just giving scores, as I do, obviously, and writing tasting notes for individual wines, and that's very important, and producers need them. The other bit is more journalistic, in inverted commas, and that's the bit that, if I'm really honest, I probably enjoy most, where I'm talking to people like Rico and I'm reading books and I'm looking what's going on. I'm looking at the Daily Maverick and I'm trying to understand the culture that produces the wines. And I think what you say, all of those things, the ecosystem is very important. We need to discuss climate change. We need to discuss labor relations. We need to discuss surpluses and prices, both in the domestic market and the export market, things like bulk wine. And I think what Rico said about COVID is very true, that I think it almost focused us more on what was really happening below the surface, not just on the Syrahs and the Shiraz, and the Chardonnays and the Sauvignon Blancs and the red blends and blah blah blah, which is the product. But I think we need to focus on, as you call it, the ecosystem, the bigger organic picture of what is going on within the wine industry. And I think that in the end, you need to do both. And I think the second bit of it is, as I said, more journalistic, in inverted commas, and there are people who do it. And within South Africa, there are a number of people who I admire who do that extremely well. So I think you shouldn't beat yourself up too much to say, hey, we haven't spotted these things. There are people, and you're one of them, who write very knowledgeably, and people like Melu and older people, nearly as old as me, like Angela Lloyd, or Kathy. These are people who do cover these things, and so I don't think you should just see it as, hey, we're the only people that notice what's really going on.
Well, that is very comforting to hear. I also know how important it is to get international voices to speak on South African wine. Mm-hmm. So as someone who does that regularly, perhaps the last question to you would be, what can this new entity do in order to make it easier for international journalists to engage with South African wine? What are perhaps some triggers or levers that we aren't properly utilizing?
I mean, the obvious answer is invite them to the country. I mean, I'm lucky enough that I get to go to South Africa 3 times a year. 2 of those trips are funded by South Africa generically, but not by individual producers directly, as it were, and the other I pay for myself to launch the report. So I think your biggest trump card in a way is the country and is the people. I mean, not just because I'm married to one, but it's easy to fall in love with South Africans in a sense, and with South Africa. It's an unbelievably beautiful place. Doesn't mean it doesn't have its problems, but who doesn't, frankly? But I think that the place itself and the people is the biggest thing that you should be engaging other journalists and communicators with. Take them there. I mean, it's not as cheap as sending them a dozen bottles of wine, but I think who would not fall in love with the Cape? I think that up till now, I mean, I have no complaints really. I think that my trips are extremely well run from my point of view. From other people's point of view, I think they'd probably say the same thing. I think you get the right mix of tasting and of vineyard visits, and probably for those other people a bit more R&R. I don't get much R&R. I don't have a day off when I go there. I'm tasting all day long. You know, don't feel sorry for me because I'm tasting some great wines. But I think, you know, show people the place, talk to them, be honest, and I think both at a bigger picture level, you know, the generic bodies, or generic body as it is now, but also as individual producers, you know, engage with journalists, tell them what's going on, express your fears, your hopes, you know, your excitement about what you're doing. I think that's very, very important.
Well, it's really encouraging to hear. So thank you for that, Tim. I
Pleasure.
thought it would be a good moment to bring Karina Goos from Kleine Zalze into the conversation. Karina, you've obviously had time to absorb the potential of the South African Wine NPC, and I'd love to get your perspective as one of South Africa's leading wine producers. What are the things as a stakeholder, what are the opportunities, I guess, that excite you most about the new structure, specifically that weren't available to you previously?
Yeah, I think Rico did a really great job of explaining the benefits of the new structure and how it's different or not. But so excuse me if I repeat some things, but a little bit like Rico said, to really relook the strategy and to really look at what we need to do throughout the whole value chain to drive the future of the South African industry. And obviously that starts with what the consumer wants, and then you have to build it backwards to actually what we plant, where Conrad becomes really important. So it is a real relooking that whole strategy and putting it together and making sure it's solid. And Rico also alluded to that, because this can only be as good as what you get the buy-in from producers and how well you communicate to everyone. So that is the other great opportunity, is to say, can we for once actually properly communicate that everyone understands what we're trying to do and how this can work if everyone works together. And I think even little things like, not all producers are aware of the tools and the information and everything that they have at their fingertips. And how do we actually get that message through to everyone to say, this is, you know, it's easy to just sit and criticize, but then they haven't even gone to the website. So how do we actually get people to buy in and to, you know, engage with the tools and everything to their, you know, benefit to drive their own businesses, and from the big strategy, build the strategy for your business, your brand, and what you can do and what you cannot do. So I think, you know, just from strategy and communication and making everyone aware, there is a big opportunity. Rico also alluded to just collaboration with local government, with national government. I think, again, if we can get better channels of communication and collaboration out to the people that make the decisions and often controls the money as well, if we can get all that lobbying right, that can be a big benefit and a big step forward, and actually also improve the image of the whole South African industry, which is something we also need. But yeah, I would like to see some big initiatives, you know, like we did way back in the 70s, a wine of origin scheme and an IPW in the 90s, and Vita a little later on. I think there's a great time and opportunity to be a leader in, you know, kind of what do we do in terms of carbon emissions. The whole world is obsessed with, you know, the environment and sustainability. So is there something there that the South African industry can be the leader and take, you know, kind of really do some groundbreaking initiatives as well, not just kind of rehashing the structures that we have and putting it together differently, but what are the big ones, the big things that can excite people, that we can do differently. So that will be for me one of the, the big opportunities. Are there some bigger projects that we can put together and not rehash what we have almost? Yeah, we can talk for a long time, but for me, those are the main things that can be opportunities through the new South African Wine initiative.
Can I ask you to drill down just a little bit on that last bit about, I guess what you're talking about, providing greater clarity perhaps for standards of environmental practices or certifications. How important do you think those are in improving exports for South African wine?
Well, I think it is an ever-changing landscape, but for sure, it's almost, I think it will become prohibitive if you do not do it. So it's less about, can that step change your exports? It's more, can it really damage what you currently have if you do not comply to environmental standards? And yeah, in our case, the social standards are as important as in environmental. So it's just, we need to be wakey and make sure we keep up with the world and do the right things to make sure we can be competitive.
Yeah. Well, Rico, you had a comment to that, I think.
Yeah, just very briefly to touch on Corina's point. So what we're finding is that markets or importers are using, I think, carbon against us as protectionism mechanism. That's my view. So a cleanup is easy because we've got a carbon calculator at farm level. We know the wineries, we know the footprint, and we know the shipping. So what we need to do is to be very proactive on what exactly is the South African carbon emission. We know to truck the wine in Europe is 8 times more emission than by ship. So let's be open and honest and on the front foot. And this is the kind of thing where we don't admit that we don't have a lot of work to do, but I think we need to speak far more directly on ESGs and set those baselines and take it broad-based. We've got the tools, Jonah. I think when I say integration is how do we link IPW with all these things and make it part of growth. So that's just my comment on that one.
No, Jono, Rico makes a very good point, because instinctively for the person sitting in Germany, they will just believe that the wine that they get from Italy has a lower carbon footprint than a bottle of wine from South Africa, but it's not true. But, how do you get that message across? Because that's just instinctively what people think. So there's a lot of work to do on the right messaging for carbon footprint.
Well, yes, it comes back to the issues of the integration of communication and getting the right message out. So I'm going to turn the conversation to Helen Koch quickly. We made her wait a long time, but while I'm doing that, just know that this is the opportunity for panel members, but also audience members to send in some questions, because we will then open the floor to those questions and hopefully be able to scratch where it itches, because I've got to ask my questions, but we want to make sure that producers, as we said, are able to get answers to some of their very practical questions. So now would be the time to start sending those through rather than waiting until afterwards. But Helen, as someone who is forced to operate in those in-between spaces between producers and various stakeholders in the industry, I'd love to hear your bird's eye view on how you think the structures will affect the Vinimark producers specifically, and also what you're hoping they will achieve.
Thanks, Jono, and thanks for the opportunity, because although we're not a producer, I do believe that the distributors in the industry will play a role in achieving the strategies that the South African wine or the new body wants to achieve. And it's maybe just figuring out how we can align with that strategy to ensure they reach their goals. But definitely, I mean, for us as a distributor, our goals are aligned with that of South African wine, in the sense of it's important to us as well that the category becomes more profitable. And we play almost a role in that last bit of the value chain. So I think before I go on, I actually want to ask Rico 2 questions. Is, how do you see the role of the distributor in this new body? And what do you see as growth? Because a lot of what I hear currently from Vinpro, what they're going to focus on, and the South African Wine, the new body is very much on the production and agricultural side. And if you say we want to achieve growth, I would like to understand what that actually means, because we sit in the middle and we kind of see the challenges that producers are faced with on both sides, from the economy side, input costs, as well as the market demand side. And if we're not going to work together and moving forward and creating that consumer demand for the category, but production is going to replant and increase, we're also not going to achieve growth. So I actually want to ask you the question first.
I'm not sure you can ask me questions.
John, I said I can.
Ellen, one of the things that not irks me, but one of the things that we need to urgently demystify is the domestic market's potential, to the extent that I believe there is a category approach that could be followed. Now, before we get to money, there is no funding available for such an approach. But I'm a bit concerned. If I look at all the indications with diminishing volumes, then the domestic market will probably be bigger than all our exports on volumes, most certainly. And that is a discussion, like it is a discussion on the global side with you guys that are liaising with the elements on how do we use things. I mean, one of the straightforward things we're going to do next year is to make a lot more about the birthday, for example. Now, I know we're saying let's run a campaign in February. We've got a birthday on the 2nd to take a consumer approach. Now, I know the marketers will say, gee whiz, Rico. But that's not going to cost money, for example. So Helen, I think what we need to demystify and get empirical research is what is the potential of the domestic market, for example, where you guys play really well. Can we build a category or not? And if so, who should do it? And so unless we find markets with better growth and become more efficient with our brands, etc., Helen, it's going to be it's tough anyway. Unpack Africa, unpack SADC, unpack Africa. So we're going to take a very much market approach and take it forward. But we'll have to look at value growth. I'm sorry, it's not going to. The bottom feeder approach is not going to work, and the producers know that. So I hope it gets you a sense. And then tourism, obviously, I think is an exponential game changer. But yeah, the likes of yourself have got a huge role to play.
Thanks, Rico. But I think that's kind of the missing piece for me still with all the bodies amalgamating, is where does that marketing and creating consumer demand responsibility lies from an industry body point of view. So I'm glad to hear that the body's already thinking about that. There's a couple of stats from Vinpro January that's keeping me awake still, and it's your future view that the average bottle price is going to be 40 Rand, and how many of our producers are actually not sustainable or profitable at this stage. So it's we need to work together. Fantastic.
Well, I mean, so Helen, I feel like you answered my first question by asking my second question. So, but I'm going to pose it to you anyway. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about the challenges that face your producers. I mean, as I say, you did just touch on it, but maybe drill down a little bit into those and make it open it up for someone like Rico to hear you express it.
Sure, Jono. I just thought I'll take the opportunity to ask that question. But as I said, I think it's more from the economical point of view. It is the additional costs and the potential additional costs that these various bodies can bring to the producers. And it's not just Vinimark's producers. It's all the producers in the category. So, I mean, if this body can help us be more efficient or producers be more efficient, I'm hoping to see input cost reduction for the producers almost before they arrive with a distributor or on the shelf for our retailers. And I think the other big challenge that we're still seeing is that market saturation. With the influx of house brands and brands more playing, or unknown brands playing in that 40 to 50 Rand price category, it's kind of creating a lot more challenges for established brands to distinguish themselves. So that, you know, and it's also not really helping the perception and the quality perception of the category in both markets, global and local at the moment. So I think it is a combination of the barriers to entry into the category is still too easy. We're seeing more and more brands entering the market, and they're not all going to be sustainable and really building brands over the long term. And then also, as I said, the marketing cost to build a brand is becoming more and more expensive, and it's also fragmented. So Rico, I think even there's an opportunity to consolidate in the sense of, and Tim, I would love to get your view on this, but there's so many competitions available for brands to enter these days, which are credible. Are they adding credibility to the quality of the South African wines? Because there's also so many layers of cost that's coming into play for the brands. I mean, in our last market review, I think we're already seeing about 1,100 brands just in the off trade. And if you literally get exposed to a brand every week, it's going to take 21 years for a consumer or shopper to be exposed to the whole category. So there's no ways we can build a brand reputation if the category just keeps on growing exponentially as well. So it's definitely, I would say, economic challenges, marketing platform fragmentation, as well as just the overall reputation for the category, both local and in the global markets that we're seeing as some of the biggest challenges that our producers are facing.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the competition stroke wine guide side, I mean, it's not really for me to say, is it, you know, which are the most credible? Obviously, I think I'm credible, but everybody thinks that about themselves. But certainly when I'm judging, I'm tasting wines and I'm tasting them cited for my report, and a lot of them come in and I'm tasting them at the so-called discovery tasting. I mean, a lot of them are festooned with stickers, and some of those, I look at them and I think, how on earth did that get a gold medal or that score? But I can understand it from a producer's point of view. They've got wine to sell. You know, they're going to take the path of least resistance. And if there are people whose standards aren't maybe quite as rigorous as others, I mean, why should the producer worry? In a sense, I can understand that. You know, I don't think that a gold medal is a gold medal is a gold medal, but consumers don't know that, and I think that it is confusing. And I think there's at least one operation that I think should be called out for being cynical, and that's putting it lightly. But you know, I'm not going to say that in a public forum, and why I think it's true. And you know, but it's I can understand why people do it, but I don't think it helps the consumer, because the consumer picks up a wine that's got a gold medal, or I don't know, or they might pick up wine that's got 95 points from me and think, who's this bozo? You know, and I don't think that's a good thing. So I think that it's important that the people reviewing the wines, and I think that Plateau, which is obviously a very strong brand, does this extremely well, and you're lucky to have them in a way. They haven't gone down that route where they're deliberately giving higher scores to wines that don't necessarily merit it. But I don't think that's true of all competitions. So I understand your dilemma, but I would urge you to back the journalists and the competitions and the guides that have more credibility and that you believe are doing a good job. End of sermon.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Tim. Helen, can I just ask you one more question too? You made a comment which on the surface appears counterintuitive, and perhaps it'll be useful to producers to understand it. You said the cost to promote a brand is getting more and more expensive. One might think with the availability of free access to media, especially peer-to-peer media, that it would be getting cheaper. Why is it getting more expensive?
John, just remember there's a couple of marketing platforms that brands need to use to build their brand and to sell their brand. So it's a combination of above the line social media. I think those elements, technological platforms, will become more and more affordable going forward. But then the question is, you know, are we almost equipping our producers with the skill sets to keep up with the technology that's available to promote their brands? So that's the one side where I also see a gap. But then also you get the promotional platforms within your retailers. I mean, they have social media. They almost use their promotional platforms as assets, and they have to monetize that. So those, we are seeing an increase in cost on those marketing platforms as well. And then, you know, our industry is built on relationships and stories around our wines. That's also becoming more and more expensive. You know, winemakers need to travel. Our producers need more and more or brand ambassadors or people on the ground to talk an individual brand story. So there's so many layers of platforms available to promote your brand or build your brand, that I think that's also causing a lot of confusion for our producers, in the sense of what do I use, which platforms are the right platforms, or then equipping our producers with more skill sets to do that or to make use of those available platforms.
I suppose that is the challenge that sits squarely in your lap right now.
That's what I'm hoping Rico can also, the new body can also contribute to the marketing challenges of the industry. So,
I mean,
yeah.
It is worth noting that video content has never been cheaper to produce than it is now. So that is definitely something that has reduced in cost, but I completely hear your point. So we have now reached the place where we can have, and we've got some questions from the audience. So unless there's a question from the panel now, I'll go to audience questions. Otherwise, yeah. So are there any questions from the panel?
I'd just like to come back on that one last point that Helen made about social media and video content. As you said, it's never been cheaper to produce. I don't think wineries make enough of social media and of videos. I mean, it's quite unbelievable how many people watch reels. I mean, you slightly wonder if they've got nothing better to do with their lives. But you know, we all spend our time on our phones, and a good reel is a really good investment. You know, it's a lot better than you know, other ways you could certainly spend your money.
Fantastic, thank you. So then let's touch on some of the questions that have come in. Rico, you mentioned earlier the Drinks Federation and how that is combining alcohol from across the entire alcohol industry. So there's a question here about, can you reveal some details of the plans of strategic alignment with the greater alcohol industry? Is it possible to find a collective hymn book?
I think I've answered it. It is actually, Jono. So we've unpacked where are the areas of commonality. And that would be around, obviously, the economic side, the research of the industry, the responsible trade side, all of that. But there's also areas where the industry body would do it, like excise. Right? So taxation on wine versus beer, it's not going to work in a collective forum. So again, a cleanup. There are clear strategies for Drinks Federation as well as AWARE, which is now under that. And if anybody wants that, we can make it available, that they know exactly what is happening there.
One of my questions about that collaboration is, given the financial clout of the beer industry in comparison to something like the wine industry, how effective will that body be in prioritizing wine goals over other goals?
Yeah, it's an interesting comment, Jonah, because there's a lot of arm wrestling, specifically by the beer sector aimed at the wine segment. And that goes with things like how taxation is done, also the fact that wine is sold in grocery stores since 1978. So there are themes where there's no love lost, because people have lost market share in COVID. And again, one should be very clear on the hat you wear when you go in there. And we're not going to step into competitive parts. I think wine's challenges has got a lot of linkages with the other segments. To be fair with you, I think there are commonalities on the government part, which we saw in COVID is part of the anti-alcohol lobby. We've got huge issues, Jono, with enforcement. Part of the growth, Helen, is that we curb illicit trade, funnily enough. That 20% of alcohol in this country is traded illicit. And our challenge and our frustration is, it's not only the fiscus, it's also the socioeconomic challenges that come with that. So again, the industry has got a clear illicit trade approach to work hard on that. But yeah, it's not perfect, Jono. I think it's a very, very cutthroat industry out there. And I've got no illusions that there are places where the industry body should stop and the players commercially should play. We get a lot of questions on solutions. And again, people are approaching us to say, well, with who can I merge? And can you do that? And it's a very fine line on giving information which is privileged and doing some matchmaking. But I think we can do a lot more work, Helen, on benchmarking and business models, on the reality of margins, on marketing spend. I think that's a great discussion to have offline as to what are the solutions and reality checks that we could have.
So the next question, I think, is also a repeat, but I'm going to say it anyway because I think it communicates one of the dominant themes that I feel will need to be answered in the future. The question is, where will the growth be? Will it be around building desire? We need iconic brands. Well, that's more of a statement than a question, but if anyone would like to respond to that, feel free. Okay, so I mean, it is, you spoke about it earlier, you know, where's the change going to be? One of the big points you brought up, Rico, was how are we defining growth? And I think that you know, if the vineyard is shrinking, is that a sign of negative growth, or is it actually a sign of efficiency, getting the really focused producers to have more space, etc.? I mean, it's very difficult for people to conceive of growth as one thing, and I think that's going to be one of the challenges that has come up again and again. One of the other points that you guys raised over the duration of the discussion was that engagement is two-sided. Now, that may, to a cynical producer, sound like something like South African Wine NPC is saying, oh, well, you guys need to come to us. We're doing amazing things, and you just need to come to us. I think that's true. The flip side is, and to use an analogy, I say to my son, you got to go clean your teeth. And then he goes to bed without cleaning his teeth. And I say to the next day, you got to go clean your teeth. And then he goes to bed without cleaning his teeth. At the end of a year of that, if his teeth fall out, that's my fault. That's not his fault. So I'm wondering, and this is a question, not a question to you, to what extent is the South African Wine NPC needing to play the role of a parent in some sense? Because you do have a privileged view, you do have expertise at your disposal. So to what extent is it your responsibility to try and make people read more than 30%?
Well, I will fully take on that responsibility, not because I think I'm the parent, because I think we can set directional leadership. I think the industry is in a very short-term orientation at the moment. It's a lot of them are in survival mode. And therefore, when I say there's a long-term future, I can see they blink out. So John, I think a way to do it, and that's our role, is to not only quantify and show that there is growth potential, but also indicate how we get there. And I think we can't keep on consulting. In a month's time, the board will sign off 80% of the strat plans. The global research part and transformation piece comes Q1. And then that's it. That's the directional solutions and the way we go. And if we need to segue into different solutions, we do it. But I think the industry now needs direction. And the consultation part is to make sure that we, to Corina's point, put forward the game changes that can really go industry-wide and make an impact. And that will be my sense, Jono, as the role that we play.
Thank you, Rico. So last chance for questions. We at 80 minutes now, so it's probably time to wrap up, but I will give a last 30 seconds, see if there's anything more from the audience, but it seems not. In which case, we will call it a day. But it has been hugely encouraging, Rico, to have you unpack the structure for us. I'm greatly encouraged by just what is available, and I hope that we can find ways to reach the producers who perhaps are not as upwardly gazing as they should be, because I think the potential is huge, and that's what Tim spoke about. Things are good. There is a strong position. Rico, you talked about, the vineyard shrinking, but actually we're in a good position. There's a number of studies that are undergoing that will enable producers to behave smarter in the market, that will enable to gauge both locally and export in a more efficient way. And so by and large, I think this has been a greatly encouraging time. So to producers who perhaps are still feeling mystified, don't forget that there are a number of platforms that you can engage with. There are virtual meetings, there are face-to-face meetings. There is a website that needs to be checked from time to time. And if you have to set a reminder to check the website when you brush your teeth, then that may be something that is necessary. But outside of that, I think we are done for the day. Thank you so much to the panel. Rico, thank you. Gordon, we appreciate your input. Karina, thanks so much. And to Helen and to Tim joining us from the UK, thank you so much for taking time to help producers understand the system that has ultimately been developed for their benefit. We wish you a great day, and that is all from ViniMark.